And with that, I think it's probably time we get started. And I'll keep admitting people as you start, David.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Margaret and I will introduce ourselves in just a minute, but welcome to our training on individual transition plans. And it's a roadmap to your students' independence. Okay. So at Matrix Parent Network, what our purpose is to empower families of children with special needs to successfully understand and access the systems that serve them. We want parents and youth to become successful advocates and self-advocates. And so with Matrix, what we do is that we provide, excuse me, we provide training and support and information to you so that you can be your child's best advocate. We don't actually supply or provide advocacy services on our own, but it's the training and support and information model. Okay, so we are a federal parent training and information center. We're a California Family Resource Center and the California Family Empowerment Center. And these are just different designations for which we get some funding, and some of the services we provide are based on those categories. All right, so just to introduce ourselves, my name is David. I'm a parent advisor with Matrix. I've been here about a year and a half. I'm a retired special education director. I also taught at a California State University for many years, teaching special education. I've been a teacher, and I retired about 8 years ago. And I also have a granddaughter with autism that I advocated for several years after I retired. And so I've been on that side of the table as well. Okay, Margaret?
Hi, I'm Margaret. I'm a senior parent advisor at Matrix Parent Network. I've been here about 10 years. I have two kids who are pretty much grown up at this point. Both had ADHD and emotional disturbance. And I went through many IEP and ITP meetings with the two of them. Back to you, David.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So what you're going to leave here knowing is what information should be included in the ITP, why transition assessments are important, how post-secondary goals are connected to activities, community experiences, related services, and annual IEP goals, and how a robust ITP can drive an IEP. When I was working, and this is particularly, I was a coordinator, secondary coordinator for special ed in a school district. And about this time of year, there was something that I called the June syndrome that would happen to way too many families of kids with IEPs. And that June syndrome is that they'd wake up the morning after high school is over, or after a adult program, an 18 to 22-year-old program is over, and they'd wake up the next morning and just say, what next? And just didn't have that planning in place that that needed to be there. This was more than 20 years ago that I was working in that position. So things have changed, luckily, for the better since then, and transition plans have become much more prominent. But if that plan doesn't take place and there's not a good ITP in place, it can be a pretty ugly scene at the end. Our job as educators is to help children become successful, independent adults, and there's nothing more important than this transition process to kind of coordinate that whole thing. So that by the time a child is 16, they should have an ITP in place. The law says that it's by the time they're 16, so sometime within their 15th year, the initial plan should be developed and included in the IEP. So let's go to, okay. So the ITP is a document within the IEP which guides a student's transition plan. It's only a couple of pages, but it's a very important document. So well-crafted detailed IETP can be the roadmap to the student's independence. We'll talk a lot more about this in coming slides, but meaning well-crafted, meaning that all of the pieces in the ITP are working together. For instance, if a student is going to a community college, let's say that's their plan, then what pieces are needed in order for that child to make that transition to a community college? All of those pieces, independent living, community experiences, all of those things need to be included in this. And it needs to be, like I said, very well coordinated in order for it to work properly. IDEA mandates an ITP be part of an IEP once a student turns 16, which we talked about. So it needs to be developed in the student's 15th year. The best practice, though, is to begin this in middle school. 7th or 8th grade is really a good time to be not only starting the conversation with the IEP team, but involving your student in the process as well. And we'll talk a little more about this in the future when we'll mention student-led IEPs. But so best practice is beginning this at the middle school and starting transition planning early. And statistics show that the kids that have this process started earlier do have better outcomes. Okay, so the sections of an ITP: student information, who's invited, and this could be not only school district personnel, the student themselves, the parent, but it could be outside agency as well. What was the student participation in the process? And again, we'll talk a little more about this in the coming slides. Were age appropriate transition assessment, and what were the results of those assessments? So the data collection is really important in this process. The student's post-secondary goals. Is the student looking at getting a diploma, getting a certificate of completion? Are they going to need training? What underlying skills are going to be needed so that they can take advantage of that training? Are they going to go on further with their education? What independent living skills do they need? The ITP should cover all of these areas. The form talks about district graduation requirements. And at some point in this process, a decision has to be made if a student is going to be looking at a certificate of completion or looking at a diploma track. And so that process, not to rush it, but to identify that as it's ongoing is important to do, because that'll drive a lot of what's happening with the transition. The age of majority, students need to be notified in their 17th year that they will become responsible for their own program when they turn 18. If there's a conservatorship in place, and our transition goals, services, activities included in the IEP, and what's not listed, how are transition goals, services, and activities listed in the IEP. So as I mentioned, that all of this stuff needs to work together. If you have a child that we mentioned going to community college, for instance, what independent living skills are they going to need if they're going to be living at home? An important part of training for kids, for instance, is like financial literacy. So the IEP team may have a conversation that the student is going to be going to a community college. They can take a financial literacy course in their first year of community college. That's something we don't have to deal with at the present time. But all of those skills that a child's going to need should be listed, and then a plan made about how and when they're going to be addressed. And that's where all the assessment pieces come in. Okay. Okay. So just the form itself, the first part is that, putting the student information in to make sure that it's accurate. And so the student invited box should always be checked. Like we did a training, I think 2 weeks ago, on student-led IEPs. And what studies have shown for students that are more involved in their IEP process, there's a clear correlation to success later in life. So these kids are employed earlier and more successfully. There's a better chance that they're getting benefits with jobs. There's a better chance that if they go to college, that they're finishing school. So all of these things lead up to the importance of the student being involved. There's a saying that we mentioned in other training, nothing about us without us. So it's about the kids, and so having them involved in this is just I can't emphasize the critical importance of that. Okay, and then there's agencies. Sorry, Margaret.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
I
this might
lost my
include,
place there. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
it might include the regional center, it might include the Department of Rehabilitation. any agencies that are going to be involved with serving the student as they're transitioning or after they transition can be invited to the IEP meeting. Now, there needs to be consultation on this because you and your student, if your student's over 18, need to be in agreement that these people can be invited. But you might want to sort of insist that certain parties are invited and do your best to get them there. My experience has been that nobody gets invited unless the parent pushes for it. So I would say if you want someone else involved in the meeting, you should make that request to the IEP team in advance. And
Okay.
I think at that point we can go on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. So transition assessments, it's the one piece that that I really don't think is being done enough of. In fact, I know it's not. And a lot of the parents that I talk to, and they look at the transition plans of the IEPs that they've got, they're either the wrong assessments or they're just a standard assessment that somebody came up with in the department. But because we're doing assessments almost daily with our students all through their educational career, if it's a quiz in in a third grade classroom, or it's a formal assessment that's done for a triennial assessment, we're doing assessments all the time. And this is the one area I said I think is almost more critical than anything else to get the assessments right. So the California Transition Alliance has come up with a list of things to be able to evaluate if an assessment's an appropriate thing for a student to use. Is it easy for the student to use? Is it age and grade appropriate? Can students relate to the language? Does it stereotype career choices? Is it easy to read and interpret? Does it assess interest or reading skills? And there's one thing I want to mention about this is that a lot of what we do with special needs kids throughout their career is that what we try to do is to get the blocks to their learning out of the way so that they can access the information they need to access in order to learn. And so when we say that, are we assessing their interests or reading skills? Is it the test so difficult to read that we're actually testing the student on their ability to read the test, or are we assessing their interests? And so it's just another accommodation that we provide for our students. And so we need to make them user friendly for the student to be able to make them valuable for them and to be able to give them the feedback that they need. And does it, like I said, does it provide feedback that leads to reflection? If the assessment doesn't lead to the student and the adults helping them come to conclusions or ideas or interests, then they're really a waste of time. We're looking at things that allow a student to say, oh, I have an interest in that. What would it take for me to be able to do that? And then it starts the whole process that, that the ITP goes through, looking at all those different areas. Does it enhance the student's insights? And that's, again, basically what we were talking about. And does it reflect the current and emerging job market? So, is what the student interested in, is what they're doing, is that going to lead them actually being able to be productive and to be able to earn a living and to be able to take care of themselves in life? Okay, on to the next one. And so according to the Age Appropriate Transition Assessment Guide, assessment should be, where is the student presently? That's the present levels that we talk about always on IEPs. Where is the student going? That's the goal piece of what we're talking about. And how will the student get there? And those are basically the services that we're talking about providing and the supports providing to the student. And these 3 points seem to be so simple, but you just don't see them followed very often. And that's really what the whole IEP process is what is the student doing presently, the present levels, where are they going to go, the goals, and then providing services. And the ITP, we're looking at the same thing. We're looking at a finite number of skills that a student needs to learn, and then a plan about how a student is going to acquire the skills in those areas. Okay. So age-appropriate transition assessments. So how do they relate to the future living and working environments? and ongoing assessing from year to year as part of the overall transition plan is essential. So it develops realistic and meaningful post-secondary goals, which can and will change. So we have to realize that the time between 12 and 13 and 18 is a pretty tumultuous time in a person's life, and they're going through lots of changes. So an interest or a plan that a student may have in 8th or 9th grade will probably change by the time they become a senior in high school or go through an adult program. But what this process does, it allows us to have a roadmap of where the student has been, and all of those underlying skills that a student was learning that had to do with those earlier plans are still appropriate for other plans that they have in the future. So again, it's that finite series of skills that they need to learn, and it's going to apply to a lot of different situations and plans that a student will have. They help with the student's self-discovery and decision-making, and it goes back again to that need for an assessment to be able to tap into that area where a student does become passionate, does become interested, and becomes an advocate for themselves, and increase the student's self-awareness and self-determination. Self-determination is really the key to all this, that a student knows where they're going, they know where they've been, and they know how to get to where they're going next, and helps develop the person-centered plan or person-driven plan, which helps your student plan for life, because that's what we're looking for, again, these successful independent adults. Okay. So these assessments could be in a lot of different formats. There are some formal standardized tests, and these are the type that you're familiar with, and like the IQ tests and the standardized testing that your students go through for their triennial IEPs. They could be informal, not tested for reliability and validity. These are more subjective. Often they're inexpensive, they're easy to use, and they do provide an awful lot of information. When I was a teacher, I gave formal tests like the Woodcock-Johnson academic test, but to really tease out that information, you can become more specific. You need to give those, they call them criterion or curriculum-based tests that really drill down into the information that you need to get. Interest and work value inventories, personality or preference tests, work-related temperament scales, all of these vocational assessments, self-determination assessments, aptitude tests. All of those are important because you want to match a student where they're going with what their strengths are. Behavioral assessments and functional life skills tests are really important. Being able to act appropriately in a work environment, be able to do things like dress appropriately, get to work on time. All of those functional life skills are vital for future success. Okay. And then just some assessment resources that we have for you on our website. We have it. Margaret, maybe you can talk about these if you don't mind, because you're more familiar with some of these resources.
All of these links should be live in the PDF that should have come with your Zoom link. So if you click on any of these links in that PDF, you should be able to be taken to those. I particularly want to point out our Transition to Adulthood guide. We were able to put that guide together on our website with a small grant we got from the Sonoma Vintners Association. And it does have a wealth of information and transition resources from all over the place, but it also lists specific transition resources in each of the 4 counties we serve. I think maybe our opening slide referred to the number of Northern California counties that we have been serving this past year, but we've decided it's too difficult for us to serve that area. So we are just serving Marin, Sonoma, Solano, and Napa counties, but we do have transition resources for all those counties listed in that guide. And so do feel free to get on there and take a tool around that. And some of these other things are just resources that can be particularly helpful to anyone as they're moving into adult life and thinking about what kind of career they might follow. This ONET, for example, It just has a listing of all types of different jobs and careers that someone might be interested in. So all of these can be interesting to you, and you might take a look at them when you have time. And with that, I think we'll now get into talking about the goals section of the ITP. And so there are a space on the ITP form for post-secondary goals. And these should all be, just like in a regular IEP meeting where you base the goals on information from assessments, you should be doing the same thing here, essentially using all those assessments we just talked about to determine what kind of goals there should be in the student's ITP and IEP. So there's going to be a gap between what the student's interest in doing after school is and what their current skill level is based on the assessments. And so that's the gap you're using. Instead of saying the gap between the core curriculum and where they are academically, we're looking at where they want to be in terms of life after school and what their skill level is now. And so that's the gap that we're going to be addressing in goals on the transition plan. And I do want to point out at this point that when a child gets to transition age, when they become, especially the required transition age of during their 15th year, when the IEP that will be in effect when they turn 16 is in place, at that point, the ITP should really be driving the IEP. The focus up until this point has been primarily getting them to be able to get through school. But at this point, it really should be, what does the child need, or the student need, or young adult at this point? What do they need in order to be successful after school? And I do want to mention that the earlier the better, but sort of interestingly, it's actually probably more important to start early for those students who might be going to community college or even a four-year university after school. The kids who are going to get a diploma and go straight into work life at age 18, those kids have to be ready when they turn 18. If they're getting their certificate, they're going to be in school until age 22, and there's a little bit longer for this transition planning to take place. But if your student is going to get a diploma, you don't have a whole lot of time to do this transition planning process if you don't start until they're almost 16 years old. And just to say that the annual goals in the IEP then are based upon the goals that are set, the post-secondary goals that are set in the ITP. So it's sort of a triangular process of IEP goals, post-secondary goals, and the transition assessment results. So those things all sort of form a triangle of things that need to go together. So here's the form, and we'll see the goal section here. And so you'll see that there's a goal for training and education that is required, employment, and that's required, and independent living as appropriate. So independent living, how much you need in terms of independent living goals is going to depend on the student. If the student is fairly able to deal with the independent living skills that we refer to as, being able to take care of themselves essentially, then this section might not be particularly important, but for other students, this is going to be a very, very important section, is what does the student need in order to become independent in adult life. Now, each of these, what the student is planning on doing upon exiting schools in whatever area, it should be based on what the student has said. It's not what the school says or what you, the parent, says. These are written in the first person. They'll say, upon completion of school, I will. And so if it's not actually the student's own word, at least has to be approved by the student after the assessments are completed, and draw on the information and results of the transition assessments. So these are, of course, assessments and discussions of where the student is now. So there may not be what we might call scaffolding around these answers. So sometimes they may not seem realistic to us. But again, it's important to involve the student no matter what the student's abilities are, and no matter what they're saying their goals are. We may need to give them some guidance as they go along to help make the goals a little more realistic, but it needs to start with what they say they want to do. Then after saying what the goal is, then one needs to talk about what kind of activities are needed to support the goal, and then what kind of community experiences will be involved. So there are two sections: the activities to support the secondary goal and the community experiences as appropriate. And so they should reflect the student's interests, they should be obtainable, and they should be observable by the person or agency responsible for the goal. For example, if the students interview, they say they enjoy working outside, they want to work alone or with other, they enjoy working with their hands, then the interest inventories indicate that they might want to work in a garden or in landscaping. The activities and community experiences then will back up these interests, or maybe they won't. If the student has an internship with a landscaping company or with the Park and Rec department doing some groundskeeping, and they have that internship, but they turn out not to be engaged and not interested in the job, if they get bored, they don't ask any questions, then the observer knows that it may be time to step back and begin looking at career interests again, and maybe that wasn't the right choice. So the essence of what we're saying is there has to be some observation of whether the experiences are working and actually supporting what the goals are. So the activities and the community experiences, it's sort of a way of testing the students' interest, not just what they said they were interested in, but what is actually demonstrable about what they might be interested in. And it's possible that you're thinking, well, the issue isn't interest but motivation, and that may be true to some extent, but we know that motivation is linked to interest, and it's important to help the student find something that they are interested enough in to be motivated to want to do that. I'm just going to relate a story that the executive director of the ARC of San Francisco related to us. And that was when they gathered a group of clients around a table and asked them what they wanted to do with their lives. No one said, go to a day program. So while some of our students may be bound for a day program, I think it's important for us to figure out what else they really want to be doing. In addition to the transition assessments, we have to be aware that some districts have a whole lot of resources available to help students with not just the assessments, but that a team of people that are helping through this transition process. And other districts are not so robust in the availability of resources. And so that's why it's important for us to think about who else besides school personnel might be involved in this process. And this is where, if the student is, for example, going to be a client of the Department of Rehabilitation and use one of their programs to get them engaged in working and helping find paying work, then having that agency involved early through either the workability program or directly with the Department of Rehab through their student services program, it will be important at this point for them to be involved in this transition planning process. And then related services. So your student may have been receiving related services, and they may still be or may not be. But this is an important time for being able to engage with social cues, and so they could be in speech therapy around pragmatics. They may be involved in OT to improve their penmanship so that they can participate in filling out job applications and doing other things that are going to be necessary. So those related services can be brought into how are they serving the ITP goals as well as the IEP in general. So in any case, it's important that all of these things be linked. So I'm going to show this triangle again. We want to have a post-secondary goal in the ITP, activities and community experiences to back that up, and then an annual IEP goal. So we start with the post-secondary goal. And this is an example from Grace's ITP. And so she said, upon completion of school, I will look for opportunities to work in a pet store to expand my knowledge of dog care, dog training techniques, dog-related products, customer service, and how to operate a cash register. Moreover, I will incorporate the knowledge I learned into developing my own dog daycare business. So that's a pretty specific goal. She actually had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to do. And so then activity and community experiences were set up to support that post-secondary goal. The activities and community experience involve the student interviewing and shadowing people with experience in the field of dog daycare and with experience working in a pet store. The student will secure a paid job or internship as a dog walker or a pet store clerk to gain experience with dogs' needs and care. The student will role play providing customer service at her vocational placement, as well as train on how to use a cash register. So again, very specific activities and experience that support the post-secondary goal. And then finally, an IEP goal is written that supports this by saying this, and this is in the format of the IEP goal that you're probably very familiar with from previous IEPs. By a certain date, the student will demonstrate understanding of the educational background, job qualifications, and training required for entry-level jobs of interest to her, that is pet store clerk, by identifying at least 5 skills and requirements for each job as measured by a 5-paragraph essay with 80% accuracy for each essay as measured by a teacher-created rubric. So here's the IEP goal in the format you're used to seeing IEP goals in, and it addresses academic skills, but those academic skills that support what the post-secondary goal is. So once the goal section is completed, then we have to look at district graduation requirements. So this section involves what's called the course of study. And that is a description of the coursework from the current year to the anticipated exit year. So you don't want to be surprised at the end of your student's high school career that they haven't completed all the credits they need to graduate, or if they haven't addressed the goals they need to go on to their transition program. So you want to make sure that early in the process, and this is why it's particularly for college-bound students, it's important to know this before they get to high school. Actually, they need to know what is required for them to get to the point of getting that diploma. or if it's a certificate, getting to a certificate. So it should be a description of the coursework, the units, the credit needed, the credits already completed and those needed or pending in order to get to that point. And it should state clearly whether we're looking at a certificate of completion or a diploma. Now, the question of whether the student's course of study was leading to a certificate of completion or diploma used to start being put on IEPs when the student was in 7th grade. This question isn't on all IEP forms anymore at that age, but at that point, you should be thinking about this. It's always probably better to keep a child on diploma track as long as possible, and not preordain that they're going to get a certificate if it is possible for them to get a diploma. So it's much easier at some point to say, okay, we're not going for the diploma, we're going for a certificate. It's hard to go in the opposite direction. If the student hasn't been getting those credits that are needed for a diploma, it's pretty hard to go the other way when they're a junior in high school. So if the student can get a diploma, they should be on diploma track. The certificate should be available for those students who are not able to get a diploma. And I should mention here that more and more schools are looking at providing something called an alternative diploma. And this is, it's important because there are things that you can do with the high school diploma in terms of jobs and other things, such as I found out going into the military. Generally, only high school graduates are accepted these days. So there are things that you really might want a diploma for. And so, there are some efforts being made to develop an alternative diploma, which might not get you into a 4-year university, but will provide a high school diploma and some of the benefits that go along that. Also, it's important that the anticipated completion date be put on there. And this becomes important. I did go to a IEP with one mom who was quite surprised that her student would be graduating early because the student was getting lots of credits from extended school year. And so she found out in October that her student would be graduating in December, as opposed to June when she originally expected her to graduate. And we were able to actually get the district to delay the graduation until June because the mom had not been notified early enough of this, but they were quite, the school was quite interested in getting that student to graduate as soon as possible. So this date should be filled in, and you should know when your student is supposed to be graduating. Another thing that comes up in transition planning is information about the age of majority. And this is something that takes some parents by surprise. They don't expect this to be something that's handled in the school transition process, but it is. There's a section on the form that calls for, has a statement on it. I'm going to enlarge it a little bit here. On or before the student's 17th birthday, he or she has been advised of the rights at the age of majority, age 18. So they have to be advised of what their legal rights are at age 18. And essentially that includes making all the decisions about their educational program and decisions related to their education. It includes the right to represent themselves at an IEP meeting and to sign the IEP in place of the parent or guardian. So that is something that is the student's right. And unfortunately, it's also their right to drop out of high school if they haven't yet gotten a diploma at age 18. But they need to be informed, and that is their right. And so as a parent, you need to be aware that this is going to happen. And, what does it mean? What should it mean when they reach the age of 18? And we have this list of things that the California Transition Alliance says that kids should be able to do when they reach the age of majority. And that is, they should understand their disability, they should advocate for themselves, they should understand why they are receiving special ed services, they should be able to participate in or lead their IEP meetings. They should be involved in the interpretation of test results. They should review their educational records, and they should know their rights under Section 504, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So all of those things are things we hope a student will be able to do when they reach the age of majority. It's going to take some work on your part as well as the school's part to make sure the student can do those things when they reach the age of majority, but it's definitely worthwhile to work on making sure those things happen. Another thing I might say, I'm going to go back to that for a minute, because it's important to know at this point, as I said, they can sign their own IEP at this point. And a student can also sign a form that allows their parents to make some educational decisions for them, or the parent will still be the signatory if the student has been conserved. But that isn't going to be the case with most students. So most students will be able to sign their own IEP and ITP when they reach the age of 18. So then there's a place on the form that says, how are the transition goals, services, and activities included in the IEP? And there's this section down at the bottom of page 2 that says, we'll enlarge a little bit here. There's all these questions. Is there an appropriate measurable post-secondary goal? Is the post-secondary goal addressed and updated in conjunction with the development of the annual IEP, et cetera? So all of these, you will see these, they'll all be checked yes. I've never seen a case where the school doesn't check yes on all of this, but it's up to the student and the parent to say, are these done appropriately? Are the activities to support the goals and community experiences boilerplate, such as the student will research community college options? Or are they specific to the student based on a thorough and thoughtful age-appropriate assessment? For example, the student will research community colleges in the immediate geographic area which can offer a certificate program in animal husbandry. So one is just boilerplate and one is specific to the student. So that's one thing you have to be aware of. Just having this checked yes does not mean that the activities and goals are specific and appropriate. So that's one of the things you need to check as you're going through this. So finally, we get to the point here of signing the document with agreement or disagreement. And this is where I mentioned before, this is up to the student if the student is 18. It's up to the parent if the student is less than 18. But nonetheless, one way or the other, this is an issue that you should have hopefully discussed with your student prior to the meeting, so you know how you will come to an agreement, how they will be involved in the decision making, and so that you know that before you go into the meeting and there won't be any surprises. At this point, I need to remind you that we are parent advisors. We're not attorneys and we're not advocates. So we don't provide legal advice, but we are here to help you find information and help you think about your advocacy rules. and how you can be a good advocate yourself. We also do have to tell you that we do get funding from the Federal Office of Special Education and the California Department of Education. And while we appreciate all the help they give us, it's never enough. We also do have to occasionally ask for money, and everything we do, we try to provide for free. But if anyone is so inclined, we're always happy to accept any donations.